The United States is one of the world's largest producers of firearms. ATF was established to enforce the laws relating to the criminal use of firearms and the regulation of the firearms industry. As such, ATF has access to certain information and possesses certain capabilities which can be of value to other countries investigating crimes involving firearms in their countries. The next speakers will outline some of the ways in which ATF can provide international assistance with your firearm enforcement operations. Our first panel member is Jim Needles of ATF. Jim's the Deputy Division Chief of the Firearms Operations Division within ATF's Field Operations Directorate. He's responsible for ATF's frontline initiative, the NIBIN program, firearms trafficking initiatives, and firearms-related training. Jim served as the Assistant Special Agent in charge of ATF's field divisions in Phoenix, New York. He was a special agent assigned to the Chicago Division, where he received a national award for outstanding achievement related to his work there on street gangs. Pete Forcelli. Pete is ATF's Assistant Country Attaché for Eastern Canada. He has 27 years of law enforcement experience. He's based in Toronto. He is responsible for providing ATF assistance to all Canadian law enforcement agencies. Gentlemen, as you wish.
Good morning. It's both encouraging and humbling to be here to see some of the success stories that you've shared with respect to firearms investigations and forensics. When I started with the New York City Police Department in 1986, most of the things that are being done here weren't possible. It's also encouraging to see how we're able to communicate across international borders and work on these cases together. I know I'm a bit of a movie fan, and I remember back in the day watching movies where you'd see the good guy pursuing the bad guy. The criminal would cross the border, turn around, and wave at the pursuing officer, basically free from prosecution. Because back in those days, it wasn't very easy to communicate across international borders. But because of the work being done here and in other symposiums like this, those borders are being erased to some degree, while the agencies are still very respectful of the sovereignty of each other's nations. So it's very encouraging to see this type of work being done. Now I'm going to discuss a little bit about what ATF can do internationally and how we can be assistance to you in pursuing your firearms investigations. Our international mission is not quite as big as some of our federal partners in with respect to having people placed in various parts of the world. Currently, we have attaché offices here in Canada. There are 3 agents assigned to Canada. We have offices in Colombia, in the capital in Bogota. That attaché would be responsible for coordinating investigations in South America. We have a regional firearms advisor in El Salvador. We have an attaché office in Mexico that's quite large, in fact, with people posted in Juarez, Tijuana, Merida, and a large contingent at the embassy in Mexico City. And we recently put people in El Salvador, Trinidad and Tobago, and we're in the process of sending an agent to Jamaica. The reason that we put people out there is to assist our partners abroad with conducting investigations and facilitating the transfer of intelligence with respect to firearms investigations to your countries as you need that assistance. We also maintain liaison posts in Interpol. In fact, Jeff is running the program there, and we have a representative at Europol. And we also provide training at the international law enforcement academies in Budapest, in Thailand, in Gaborone, and in El Salvador, forgive me. So we're out there to assist our foreign partners in conducting investigations the best we can. And I think we just lost our PowerPoint. Okay, thank you. All right, our offices work with the host nation. Like, for example, I'm posted here in Canada. My position is to facilitate the intelligence exchange between the United States and Canada. But here, I am not allowed to participate in criminal investigations. I'm not armed. My job is not to conduct independent investigations, but merely to supplement investigations that are being conducted by the Canadian police authorities. We serve all police within Canada. Our associates in Mexico serve the police authorities in Mexico. The communication has been quite good of late, and it's gotten better over the years, again, as symposiums like this take place and people realize the importance of communicating across international lines. What this does is this allows for us to use intelligence-led policing both in the country that's requesting our assistance and in our country. And we do that through the E-Trace database and sharing firearms tracing information, but also with respect to conducting collateral investigations. We also work with coordinating with each other's country with respect to sharing documents that might be needed for court or for prosecutions, like, for example, obtaining a certified copy of a firearms trace so that it can be admitted as evidence in your country if you make such a request. Now, the collateral investigations, what would happen is, typically with a firearms trace that comes out of the United States, you may recover a firearm within your country and determine that it was purchased or trafficked from the United States. That's excellent to have that information, but it's really worthless if you don't have somebody to follow up in the United States with that information. So, for example, if a firearm was, say, recovered here in Canada, we would know this through the trace, and we would find out through the tracing system who purchased that firearm. We would then consult with the local authorities up here, or the RCMP, or whoever is conducting that investigation, to see if conducting an investigation in the United States would interfere with their case. If it's an undercover case or something where there's some sensitivities, they may ask us to wait a little bit. But once we are granted permission to start our investigation in the United States, we would then go and try to track that firearm from the second it was purchased and find out how it got across the lines into your country. And what's done is also we do intelligence packages on anyone that's involved in that investigation. And sometimes that intelligence may correspond with the information that's coming up in cases in your country. So it allows us to merge that information to pursue criminals, again, across the border and seek justice in both the country where the gun was recovered and here, in the United States where the gun was purchased. Firearms tracing. I know there's been some discussion about E-Trace, and I'm not sure if everyone here knows how it actually works once the information is put into the E-Trace system. Obviously, with E-Trace, it's required that you put in the firearm serial number, some information about the recovery. You'd need to know if there's an importer, who imported the firearm, specific markings that allow us to trace that weapon. Predominantly, we've been very successful in conducting traces with guns that are sourced in the United States. But frankly, we've expanded beyond that. For example, up here in Canada, they've abolished the long gun registry, and we've assisted the Canadians with tracing firearms that were sold here in Canada, where they can no longer do that because the registry's not in place. But what happens is when you request that trace, it's sent, as Jeff said, to a brick and mortar building in Martinsburg, West Virginia. At that location, because of restrictions on the creation of a firearms database nationally, there is no such thing where on TV you may see, if you watch today's programs, an analyst types in information and things pop up and case closed in 2 minutes. For us, what's required is the analysts at the tracing center will have to contact the manufacturer of that firearm and ask them for the details of where that firearm was made and where it was shipped to, for example, the wholesaler. We would then have to contact that wholesaler and ask them who they shipped the firearm to, and they may put us in the direction of a retailer. Once that retailer sells that firearm to an individual in the first retail purchase, that's where the tracing ends. Now, if the gun is reported stolen, if the gun is purchased at a gun show, if the gun is purchased via the internet in what's called a private sale, well, then that adds legwork, and that's where our agents would come in to try to follow that firearm from its first retail purchase to how it was recovered at your crime scene. Additionally, through our attaché offices, we provide training, again, at the International Law Enforcement Academies, but sometimes we can conduct training within your country based on sending experts to your nation to help conduct a more localized training. We are responsible for liaison in the attaché office with the countries that we are posted in. But if you don't have an assistant attaché or an attaché in your country, that doesn't mean that ATF's not willing to help you. It's just that you may have to contact our International Affairs Division, or even if you contact one of the country attachés in a nearby country, we'll be happy to help you with your investigation. Communication, again, like this, it's nice to see people talking about success and talking about investigations without the interference of politics or bureaucracy, because we all know how that can be sometimes a hindrance, although it's very necessary, especially respecting each other's sovereignties and whatnot. But information sharing is critical to what we do. I mean, intelligence should lead policing, and ballistics and firearms information, albeit sometimes forensically, always forensically significant, a lot of times it's the intelligence behind that information that can drive an investigation and make it a success. And the other thing is trust and success building. And clearly, there's been a lot of that discussed here, and it's very humbling to hear. But through trust and through sharing our intelligence, we can continue to put a dent in violent gun-related crime. The other thing that we do with our eTrace database is we do analysis. We try to determine through eTrace, through the queries that you send in, who are our traffickers. We also determine what are weapons of choice. For example, I worked for a bit on the southwest border, and I can tell you that the weapons of choice that were being trafficked into Mexico were variations of the AK-47 rifle, the AR-15, the Barrett 50 caliber rifle, long guns primarily, whereas in Canada, where I'm posted now, we predominantly see the Glock, the Smith & Wesson handguns, which are easily concealable and are preferred by those involved in gang activity or firearms trafficking here in Canada. In your respective countries, it may be a different trend, but through our analysis of eTrace, we'll be able to determine that and share that information with you so you know what to look at as well. So, again, it's sharing of intelligence. Now, this slide you saw yesterday, again, my boss pirated that from me, by the way. Bill Temple, who's my supervisor, he wanted to review my PowerPoint. But basically, that's what we also do, is we give an overview of where guns are being recovered, which helps the authorities, for example, here in Canada, have an idea of where the paths are. Because we'd like to stem the flow of guns coming into the country, but we also need them to be aware of where the guns are coming in so they can deal with issues on that side of the border as well. I'm going to turn it over to Jim, but at the end, I'm happy to answer any questions. And again, it's very humbling to see this type of exchange of information and intelligence going on here, and it's encouraging to see, and hopefully it will continue. So, thank you.
Thank you, Pete. And also I wanted to say thank you to FTI and Interpol for hosting this symposium and giving ATF some time to speak here. Appreciate that very much. A common theme this week has been, it started out with the gentleman from Spain and Portugal, the presentations from the UK, the Caribbean. Everybody's talking about improving their timing, improving the processes with IBIS, and making this system work to its potential. I'm going to talk about the same thing. I'm going to talk about how the NIBIN system is working within the U.S. and is working within ATF, and some of the changes that we're making and kind of a transition period we're going through right now. You know, we're not inventing anything here. We're, you know, FTI, you know, has provided the world with the technology we need. It's up to us to put the processes together to improve that and to use it to, you know, to each of our advantages. One of the things ATF is doing is moving our system away from the lab and making it more of an investigative tool. And I'm glad Dr. Lee left here because I didn't want to replace Pete in his next presentation, but bear with me here a minute. What we're doing, when I say move it out of the lab, there's about 800 firearms examiners in the world. They're a commodity. We don't feel that we need to use firearms examiners to do entries, do correlations, do test fires. We can get technicians to do that. We can get contractors to do that. Let's use the firearms examiners to be the experts. They can make the confirmation on the hits. They can testify in court. Let's keep them as the experts they are and utilize them as the experts they are. So when I say we're looking to move much of the process out of the lab, that's what I mean by that. Let's free up our firearms examiners. I kind of use the analogy, you don't go to a neurosurgeon to check yourself for a sore throat. let's use the firearms examiners to the best of their ability. Here it is. Everything we do at ATF, it's to produce actionable crime gun intelligence in a timely manner. That's not a goal, that's not a strategy, it's not our mission. It's an understanding that whenever we exert our resources, whether it be through people, processes, or technology, we want it to be leading us to producing actionable crime gun intelligence in a timely manner. And what's crime gun intelligence? It's NIBIN, it's E-Trace, and it's whatever law enforcement intelligence, whatever databases we have access to, it's the merging of all of that information. We're not viewing NIBIN or E-Trace as separate entities. We want to merge the information from these three sources, get that analyzed, and develop targets. And this will give us a targeting, combining. It will focus us on targeted individuals. Individuals we like to call trigger pullers. Trigger pullers are the individuals out there doing the shootings. We want our intelligence to lead us to those individuals. I have up here use versus possession. For a long time, ATF has looked at when identifying our criminals as, criminal possessors of firearms. We want to change that. We want to look at who are the users. When you have all this trace information that you get in, which is very good. We get all this trace information, but now let's narrow it down, those traces, to who are the people actually using the firearms, and focus on them. Let's talk specifically a little bit about our NIBIN. Here's our old NIBIN mission statement. Here's our new one. We want to identify, target, and prosecute shooters and their sources of crime guns. It's very direct and to the point. Identify, target, and prosecute shooters and their sources of crime gun. And the way that we're going to do that, as I said, with the criminal intelligence, combining the NIBIN, tracing, and law enforcement intelligence. Our tracing process, Pete talked to you about this. As you can see, it's phone calls to the manufacturer, to the wholesaler, to the gun shop, who tells us who purchased the firearm. This might be a little difficult to read, but what I have here is a NIBIN flow chart, and this is the process. The NIBIN process. Now, this process in different cities and different sites across the country, may be facilitated in different ways, but this is mainly the process. It starts out here with the evidence being recovered and the data being entered. Data is entered into NIBIN and traced. Then here, if we have a correlation, the information immediately goes out to the detective and immediately goes for analysis. We don't wait on the analysis to give the information to the detectives. We get the information to detectives that there's been a hit immediately. The analysis, which will come generally within a day or the same day, will then be also forwarded to the detectives. We then have investigative follow-up. The leads that are generated from this information are followed up. Then we have our arrest and prosecution. And again, the way this is carried out, the way we use this chart is when we go to a certain site and we do an assessment of that site, we look at this chart to find out where the choke points are. Is it taking, we have the backlog situation in the U.S. can be anywhere from weeks to months to a year to get this information out. And that's what we have to improve. So is the problem right here, getting the evidence to be entered? If so, we have to look at the policies of the police department. Is the problem of once the evidence is entered right away, but we don't have the people to do the examinations right away? Well, then we know we have to focus our resources on getting more techs, more analysts. Are we doing proper follow-up? Do we have enough agents assigned, enough officers assigned to do the proper follow-up of the information? And of course, do we have the analysts to provide the leads? So these are some of the things we look at. Move to the next slide. I want to talk to you about a case in Chicago where I'm going to illustrate the need, the importance of migrating both the NIBIN and E-Trace information. There's a case in Chicago where an individual was parked in his car and was shot to death. The incident occurred, let me pull this up here. In this particular incident, on 9/29, the firearm was purchased. The very next day, the victim was shot and killed. 8 years later, almost to the day, the Chicago Police Department recovered that firearm. Approximately 9 months later, they get their NIBIN information back. So that's what I'm talking about, the timing that we have to improve and have to identify where in the process where we have to improve. 9 months later, they get the information back and find out that gun is linked to that homicide. It's not for another 4 months that the gun gets traced. Obviously, they want the trace information back right away because we have a one-day time to crime. Almost 9 years later, they find, within 5 days, they find the purchaser of the firearm. Defendant is then arrested. There's a guilty verdict. Defendant receives 50 years in jail. Now let's take a look at that same chart. In the blue, we have the gun trace information. In the red, we have the hit information. If you take away the gun trace information, if you take away those two blue points there, all you have is the NIBIN information. You have a person shot, you have 8 years later, you have a gun recovered. You have no leads, still have no leads. But when you trace the information, now you know the gun was purchased a day before the crime. You know who purchased it. Without the trace information, you wouldn't have solved this case. Without the NIBIN information, you wouldn't have solved this case. If you just had the trace information, the firearms purchased, 8 years later, you get the information back that it's recovered, we probably wouldn't even look at that. Generally, we look at time to crimes of 2 or 3 years where we'll pursue it. 8 years, we wouldn't have looked at it. But now that we have the NIBIN information and know that the gun was used the next day after it was purchased, it was followed up on. So that's by merging this information. We can't view the IBIS information, we can't view trace information as two separate entities. We have to merge them. And then along with whatever other databases we have access to, we need to analyze all that information to develop our leads. how crime gun intelligence helps. Again, as a federal agency, when we go to state agencies or the local police departments and we sit across the table from the chief of police, this is what we say. This is how we can help you. We bring you crime gun intelligence. And this is what crime gun intelligence does for us. We can also develop federal investigations. Generally, the federal investigations, the more conspiracy-type investigations, the long-term investigations that as a federal agency we're better equipped to handle than a local than a local or state agency. Local or state agencies have to keep turning their cases over. Generally, we have the luxury of a little more time where we can work on longer-term investigations. And again, as I had mentioned, it gives us an avenue for targeted prosecution. I want to talk to you again about a case in Denver. Denver, an individual goes into a bar, has a few drinks, gets in a bar fight, leaves the bar, shoots off a couple rounds back at the bar as he's driving off. Nobody's injured. Police come and collect the shell casings. A couple months later, same individual goes into a bar, has a few drinks, gets into another bar fight, pulls out his gun in the bar, shoots some rounds, takes off. As he's leaving the bar again, shoots back at the bar. Again, nobody injured. A month later, goes to the bar, gets in another bar fight, this time shoots and kills the person. Police respond, they grab him with the gun. Initially, on the face of it, the incident in September of 2011, the suspect gave a defense of self-defense. It's not illegal to carry a gun in Denver. The individual was not a prohibited person. So he was saying he got into a fight, the individual threatened him, and in self-defense he shot and killed him. The prosecutor was looking to plea bargain on that until the IFFS information came back and found out what this guy's MO was, that he goes into bars, gets in fights, and pulls his gun out to shoot people. He was then charged with a second-degree murder case which is pending right now in Denver. But it shows the value, again, of what we're doing. This might be a little difficult to read, but it's about crime gun intelligence and what our challenge is. And what our challenge is, in a few words, it's who's the shooter? Who's doing the shootings? Where are they getting their guns? And we have to focus on, again, the user versus the possessor. That's our challenge. In the bottom left-hand side, again, combining this information, the NIBIN, the E-Trace, the whatever data and whatever other intelligence we can gather, getting that all analyzed and producing a target. Again, goes back to what's our mission. Identify, target, prosecute the shooters and their sources of crime guns. Our solution to our challenge, again, is crime gun intelligence. What are the benefits? Obviously, enforcement operations are more effective through targeting specific individuals. We're focusing on individuals rather than geographic areas when we're doing our enforcement. We're using our technology and intelligence-led policing, and we have proven measurable results, and that is arrests. At ATF, we're no longer looking at the success of the system as how many entries we make into IFFS, how many hits we get into IBIS. That's all good, but that's not how we're measuring our results. We now measure our results by the number of people that are being arrested and the shooters, the trigger pullers that we're taking off the street. So that brings us to our crime gun targeting concept. Identify target shooters before they can reoffend. Everything I've discussed right here, we have put together in what we call a concept city in Denver, Colorado. We're merging our information. We've teamed up with the Denver Police Department. We have dedicated ATF agents, dedicated detectives who work full-time on a task force, along with support personnel and analysts. They've cleaned up the backlog at that site. There is no backlog. They're getting real-time information, IBIS information. They get the information back in virtually a day or two, and they're following up immediately by merging the trace data, merging the IBIS data, and following up on these investigations. What success have we had? This program has been put into place approximately the middle of January of this year. It started, and the success is starting to come in on a weekly basis. Case last week, we did a search warrant on an individual who the firearm, he's a suspect in a homicide. The firearm comes back to 4 other shootings, connected him. He was arrested last week. Another case last week, it was a domestic situation where the wife came to the husband's apartment. Subsequently, the wife was shot and killed. The husband's story was that when she came, an argument ensued. She pulled a gun out of her purse. There was a struggle. Pulled the gun away from the woman and shot and killed her in self-defense. We got the tracing information back right away, which showed the husband purchased that firearm. Got that information back immediately, took that into the interview of the husband. When he was confronted with that, he confessed to the story that he shot and killed the wife. So in working these cases in real time and getting this information back in real time, in giving the resources, that being office detectives, special agents, to follow up on this information immediately, this becomes our program for the prevention of violent crime. We are looking to replicate this model in several other cities in the U.S., and as we can show our success and more funding becomes available, this will be our model throughout the country and how we will be utilizing IBIS and crime gun intelligence. Thank you.
Any questions for the panel? Come on.
We have one right here, Pete.
Thank you, gentlemen. I appreciate your success stories in Denver and Chicago. And I'm aware that your office is called Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. You mentioned extensively about your duties concerning firearms. And my question is, what's your relationship in as far as alcohol, tobacco, and perhaps explosives? Thank you.
Sure. When ATF started, we were actually started under the United States Department of Treasury, and our role initially was collecting the taxes on alcohol and tobacco products, because many criminal organizations profit from diverting those commodities out of the legal market where they're taxed and selling them on the illegal market for a profit, and then diverting that money to organized crime, terrorism, and other things. So that's where that mission first came in. We picked up the firearms with the initiation of the National Firearms Act and the Gun Control Act of 1968. As far as explosives and arson, they were bestowed upon us by Congress, and arson more so because of the federal nexus to arsons back in the 1960s when people were burning churches in the South to perpetuate racial crimes, mostly black churches. So they needed a federal agency to investigate those sorts of crimes because they weren't getting the proper attention at the state level. So that's how we inherited our arson jurisdiction. I don't know if that answers the question. But primarily, just these are the roles that Congress has bestowed upon us with respect to the arson, explosives, and of course our three initials, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms.
Any other questions? There's one back over there.
Voy a hablar en español. Ustedes han mencionado que solamente se dedican al rastreo de las armas de fuego. Ahora, los dispositivos y las piezas de estas armas que son para intercambio, ¿cómo lo hacen?
Actually, we investigate those cases as well. In fact, we very recently had a success here in Canada where we, by patrolling the internet and watching for people selling in those parts, an ATF agent in Tucson determined that a person was selling parts for a Glock, for example, that can turn it into a fully automatic machine pistol. It turned out that the source of those components were from up here in Canada. I can't be too specific because it's an ongoing case, but we pursued that information with the assistance of police authorities here in Quebec and in Ontario, and we were able to make arrests and put that person out of business. We also do such things with explosives parts. We've had cases in, for example, in Arizona with explosives being transported into Mexico. An individual was arming the Sinaloan cartel with hand grenades. By coordinating our investigative efforts with our agents in Arizona and the PGR and CSEN in Mexico, we made arrests on both sides of the border, and that man, we believe, made over 2,000 hand grenades for the Sinaloan cartel. He's currently being prosecuted in Mexico, as a matter of fact, thanks to the wonderful work of the PGR. So if it involves firearms, components of firearms, silencers, and they're crossing borders and coming into the United States, then we will pursue people who are trafficking in those components. Any question?
Any further questions? Thank you, panel.